G'day and welcome to another gun review video. Today we're looking at this kind of ugly looking thing. This is a Savage Model 65M. It may just look like a reasonably modern sort of bolt action rifle, nothing too exciting. It is a rather unusual kind of rifle, which is why I bought it actually. And also because it's in virtually, as you can see, as new condition. It's got a couple of tiny little marks on the stock storage, safe storage marks, but other than that, it looks like it's almost unfired. This is chambered in 22 rimfire Magnum, and I saw this one, and after a little bit of research, I didn't find a lot on the net. There's very little on the net with these. I discovered that it's unusual in that it's actually it's a bolt action, obviously, but it's hammer fired. And now I didn't even realise that there was such a thing, to be honest, despite all my years of mucking around with weird firearms. But it's not alone. Mossberg actually had a range of rifles, very similar, both in long rifle and Magnum. It's model 640, I think it was called. It's called the Chuckster, obviously for shooting woodchucks, I guess, I don't know. That's a very similar sort of design, also hammer fired. But when you compare the designs, even though they're very similar, it doesn't appear like this is just I thought initially there might be like a joint venture thing, whereas Mossberg kind of make these and Savage just mark them. But I haven't been able to find any actual proof for that. It almost seems to me like Mossberg was making these Chucksters, which by the way seemed to be quite popular back in the day. Apparently amazingly accurate and reliable, and like a lot of these Mossberg 22s, ugly, just like this is. Apparently I can't find the information that there's any direct relationship between the two, apart from, as I said, maybe Savage just copying the design. It's fed by a box magazine. One thing I like about this rifle is the magazine will drop free. The other good thing is this magazine is the same magazine as they're still using in Savage 22 Magnum rifles, so it's readily available. So obviously what you need to do when you put the magazine is put it in a little bit, push back against the spring, and then it will go straight in. If you try to just find the tab and just sort of shove it, the little tab on the back tends to get caught. You have to push it back so that the tab is well within its little groove, and then it will go in. So there we go. There's a trick I just discovered while I was talking to you. Bolt action. Now, one thing that you'll note with these, and we're going to go into this a bit further in a little while, is you can't take the bolt out because it's got this whole hammer fired system in the back, which I'll show you shortly. General cleaning for this rifle is going to have to be carefully done from the muzzle, just like you would with a lot of lever actions. You've got a typical Savage type safety here, just like in the older Savage Model 4 and 5, but it's forward for safe, back for fire. Now, when I got this, I was it does say we'll show you a bit close up in a minute, on the little safety has actually got a little S with an arrow pointed backwards, so safe fire. One thing about this safety is that a safety really should have definite click on off, click on off. This kind of just floats and it's a bit kind of crappy really. So we've got a solid steel receiver. This part here is also steel. That's a difference which might even be alloy actually, looking at it. Could well be, I think it may be anodized alloy, but it's metal anyway. Now, as far as time of manufacture of this rifle, I'm still a little bit vague. There's virtually no information about that sort of thing on the net about this. In fact, there's, apart from a couple of forum posts and a few of them for sale on auction sites in the US or general selling sites, both auction and for sale sites in the US, but also surprisingly in Australia. At any given time there seems to be one or two of these for sale on the Australian used gun market online websites. And also, you know, when you do a search, you get caches where it might be 2 or 3 years ago. That they seem to have imported a few of them into Australia, and they are around. But I don't think they were made for very long because there's just no information. If that was something that was made for years and years, and you know there was heaps of them around, there'd be heaps of information about them, people have them and all that. Whereas there's one other YouTube video about this rifle, the guy from the southern USA, who all he does is shoot. He doesn't really know much about it. In fact, he says it's an Unschutz, which it's not a Savage Unschutz. That's just rubbish.
Savage did have a agreement with Unschutz, who actually made rifles which were marked and sold as Savage rifles. The Magnum versions were the 164M and the 141M as pictured here. Clearly they're a completely different class of rifle to the 65M. I found that the best information really is advertisements on eBay of people selling advertisements for firearms out of old shooting magazines, because the actual magazine has a specific date. Now let's look at this one for a start. This is from 1963, and if we look at this bottom rifle, it's a model 63, and there's also a 63M, which would be the Magnum version. And this is a single shot rifle, and it has an automatic safety that comes on every time the bolt's operated. But it's clearly got the same action, it's got the same hammer fired action as the 65M, so I suspect this was the first model. Maybe they designed it just to be a single shot and then later modified it, but I have seen some mention of this rifle, this model, in the forums as well. Here's an ad from 1966. Now you see at the top there we've got our model 65 and model 65M rifles, but the stock is quite a bit different to mine. You'll notice there doesn't seem to be any checkering, and the front of the fore end seems to sort of slope upwards in a very different shape to mine, so there must have been an early version of them. This advertisement started from 1966 and went right through to 1972, which is when the rifle seems to have disappeared. Note the fore end on the top 65N rifle is the same as mine. They've changed the fore end to that sloping back style. But also note the other two rifles. The middle one is actually a Stevens branded rifle 34 and 34M. Basically the same rifle, but with what they call a walnut finished hardwood stock, which I think means a beech stock. And then at the bottom we've got the model 46, which I think is 22 long rifle only. But as you can see, same action, but it's actually a tube-fed bolt action repeater.
If we look at the styling of 22 rimfire rifles, I mean, I've got a few of them. The traditional styling that we saw from back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s kind of went through to the 60s, and then in the late 60s, you know, we talk, about Winchester. They talk about pre and post 64 rifles. And if you look at this rifle, the styling is similar to rifles in that sort of 1970s kind of period. Just the way that the rifle's cut. We got this ugly impressed checkering, which is costs nothing to do. That just has like a big stamping machine. I think it just stamps the checkering into the stock. I mean, it does the job, I suppose. If you're making a utilitarian firearm, it's fine. But that was became common. That was common during that time, whereas in later sort of more budget firearms, like if you looked at a Woodstock Savage now, a new one, it would have checkering, but it would be cut checkering, but machine cut, not, your guy wouldn't have sat there like they did back in the 30s cutting it. They have a little machine that actually cuts it. So whereas this impressed checkering seems to have been between the period of when they wanted to cheapen the cost of making the rifle, but still have checkering, and when the cut checkering machines were kind of introduced. So my first rifle actually ever, which my father bought me new when I was about 16. So that was back in the first couple of years of the 80s, was a Winchester Model 490 semi-auto, and that had a very similar styling to this. And unfortunately I don't have that anymore. The government confiscated that off me in 1996. That's why as soon as I saw this, I sort of thought, yeah, this is the same sort of style as the old Winchester 490 I used to have. Alright, let's have a look at this rifle a bit more closely. Now the rifle has a 21-inch barrel, but if you look at it, the diameter here at the breech and at the muzzle isn't really that much different. It's a really heavy barrel. The receiver is a solid piece of tubular steel. The barrel is actually pressed and pinned into the receiver. Quite a small ejection port for a Magnum, really, just long enough, but you can see how thick the steel is there of this receiver. So the whole thing looks pretty stiff, and on the few posts that are on the forums about these, people say they're actually really quite accurate. So that's what I'm hoping with this one. And as you can see, it's had so little use, it should have good potential for accuracy. Ugly impressed checkering. It's pretty awful. Yeah, apart from that, actually, that checkering is the worst part about this rifle. The actual shape of the stock is quite good. It comes with, you got the old white line spacer. They were kind of big back at that time too, in the 70s. The old white line spacers, and even the white line thing on the QD the swivel studs. Magazine release is just a simple spring that pulls back and releases the magazine. So let's have a close-up of this, putting this magazine. We'll just get the bolt out, open the bolt so it's not in the way. You can see there's this little metal kind of tab with a spring catch that's just on it there. And the way it works is we've got this little, see that little channel, I guess you call it, in the magazine, actually surrounds that cap. So if you sort of just stick it in like you would a normal magazine and try to shove it in, as you would like a 22 long rifle Savage magazine where it catches up the top inside here somewhere. As you put the magazine, you push backwards this way, so you're pushing, you're pushing that spring out, and you're actually pushing the flat side of the magazine against that little stud, so it's actually going to slide against that fat side and not catch on those little bent tabs. So that's the secret. And then if you just push like that, it'll go in and click in place. So I think it's one of those things, if you're using this rifle regularly, that will become second nature. So the little safety tab, you can see safe is back, just like in previous Savage, and forward, and it works in the same way as you'll see when we pull it apart. The bolt has this dust cover, which as you pull it back, it fills in that gap there, obviously, and then when you go right back, it actually sticks out the back. It doesn't stick out far enough to actually be likely to catch on anything when the bolt's open, but you just have to be aware of that. If we have a look at the barrel markings, it's got Savage and Savage Arms, Westfield, Massachusetts, USA, Model 65M. Proof tested 22 Winchester Magnum rimfire only. And then if we go down here, there's a couple of like a Savage factory proof marks on the barrel. And then we've got the serial number there, which is very high, 8 million. As far as the finish goes, you can see a fair bit of machining marks on the barrel. That's another difference you see in more modern firearms compared to the older ones. In the old days, they used to generally make them and they'd be draw filed and polished to an extent. Rear side is a simple stamped metal sight set in a 3/8 inch dovetail with a little elevator. Pretty typical for budget 22 rifle. And then the front is a little screwed on ramp with a non-removable bead on it. Now those of you who've seen some of my videos of my other older, especially American 22 rifles, almost all of them are takedown rifles, because back when they were designed, back in the early 20th century, people didn't have cars. So if you went shooting, you might go on a train, or you might walk, or go by horseback. Having a takedown rifle was seen as a major benefit, and so it was a big selling point. So that's what all the major gun companies went to great lengths to make their rifles takedowns if they could. This tended to mean that they had a big, the bolt actions would have a big knob along here somewhere, like a finger knob. You'll see, I'll put up a couple of links for
for some previous videos where you'll see that. But then, you know, after the Second World War, when people started having cars, the need for takedowns went away. Now, some of the designs from pre-World War II, Winchester Model 69A is a good example. The early ones had a takedown knob, but then by the time mine was made, I think mine was made in the 50s, the knob had become a screw. So generally the screw would have a fairly coarse pitch, so it was easy to undo, and would have a fairly big slot, so usually it would fit one of the coins, like a nickel or a dime, so that people would always have one of them in their pocket, so they could always take it down wherever they were. Now, I was actually pleasantly surprised when I got this rifle, and I actually realised this is actually designed as a takedown, despite its kind of modern appearance. So we've got the takedown screw here, and I got an Australian 10-cent piece. Now this is about probably halfway between a nickel and a quarter in size, but it's pretty much exactly the right size. So I'd say it's probably designed for a nickel sized coin to undo this. So we just can get it started, undo it. Now we need to take the magazine out. Should have done that first, shouldn't I? And that will come out. So let's have a look at this action. So luckily it's cocked now, so I'm able to open the bolt easily without pushing the hammer back. But all right, so there we go. So let's open the bolt. So for a start, let's have a look at the magazine catch. So you can see all it is this piece of bent metal with a thing. So the magazine just goes on there like that, and that holds that in place. Then of course you've also got the stock kind of around it, holding it there. Barrel's probably pressed in and held in place with a couple of roughly bashed in roll pins. Now you can sort of see how little used this is. Like, this is probably the original grease from the factory gob of grease that's there. So but anyway, we've got a roll pin there. So but you can actually see the hammer there. See the hammer? Let's just put a snap cap in, just to protect that. And we'll close the bolt. Alright, so you can see the hammer here. See, so it's actually been pulled back. So then if we make sure the safety is forward, pull the trigger, and the hammer drops and hits a firing pin, which I haven't had this apart. We will take it apart and have a look, but obviously it's probably just got a spring, a firing pin with a spring in it to keep it back. Right, I've got it cocked again now. If you look at the way the safety works, basically just this rotating thing that just blocks the trigger, so the trigger can't be pulled up. The way this goes in, it does work fine, but it doesn't really index very neatly in that bit at the back of the trigger. And this doesn't really have a really definite, like when it's forward it's just kind of floating around. It's only really when it's jammed into that bit there that it kind of feels, but it could easily be like, as a safety goes, I'm not really that impressed with this. If you see that there's that little spring which surrounds the safety, the little silver one, and then it has just a little finger sticking up, and see there's just a little punched bit on that which is actually just going into a groove. And alright, so let's just dismantle this rifle, and for two reasons. One is just to see how it goes together and get the bolt out and look down the bore and all that, and the second is I want to just have a look at this safe, see if I can do something about this safety. So we'll take the mag out, I'll just check. Okay, that's clear. Now, the first thing I think we need to do is knock this roll pin out. Alright, there's that. going on with that. This is a standard pin, so you can see it's actually got the little kind of, not knurling, but little grooves that actually cause it to bite into the pressed metal part. So when you put it back in, you have to make sure you put in the smooth end and go in from the same direction so it bites into the same place. So let's just pull that out. There we go. So there's our fire control group. So there's not much going on there. So here's the safety, the catch. So you can see this little spring sits like that, and this is the little bit that goes into the little things in this barrel extension, which we haven't, this kind of what do we call it, receiver extension, which we haven't taken off yet. We'll show you that in a minute. But yeah, I might be able to tweak this spring a little bit, just to try to get it to index a bit better. There's 3 screws we've got to take out, I think. There's these 2, and then this takedown screw, it also goes through that part as well. So, all right, we'll take this bit off first. Need a screwdriver wide enough for that. There we go. So this one's actually screwing into that extension there. All right, yeah, this screw was super tight, and because I couldn't get a gun screwdriver in there, I had to use a normal one, and a spanner and a wrench on the end, and kind of mangled the head a bit. All right, so we should now be able to pull this out. There we go. And theoretically now the bolt will come out. All right, and there we go. We've just got a simple tubular receiver with a barrel on it. Let's have a look at the bolt now. So we've got this dust cover, which is in place, but the bolt handle actually rotates. The bolt doesn't rotate. This goes back and forth, and this dust cover, yeah, it's just spring steel. There's the firing pin there. So so yeah, if you had to dismantle the bolt, it's a very simple bolt. There's probably not a lot of reasons why you'd want to dismantle it, I wouldn't think. But unless you broke a firing pin, I guess. Oh, I see. So we've got an outer battery safety kind of thing here. If you look at this, so you can see there's that notch there. So the bolt handle has to be down for the rifle to be able to fire. When the bolt handle's up, it holds the firing pin back. So just in case, so if someone pulled the trigger when the bolt handle's open and the hammer dropped, because of course the actual fire control group's got nothing to do with the bolt. That's going to stop an outer battery. It looks like we've got a pin here. So, oh, that's for the extractor. So we've just got a typical extractor with a spring in it behind it by the feel of it. Yeah. So there's so obviously this back collar, to get the firing pin out, this back collar would have to come off. I'm not going to pull this off now. There's actually a spring clip. See, there's a spring clip there. So if you had a broken firing pin and you needed to make a new firing pin and take the firing pin out, you'd pop that spring clip off. This collar would then come off, and the dust cover with its collar, and then the firing pin would just come out the back. So there you go, there's a trick for you, but I'm not going to do that now because A, that spring clip will probably go springing away, or I might break it yeah. So I want to avoid that. You can see it's got a cartridge holder on the other side of the bolt, which is a much more simple, just a flat spring steel kind of arrangement. Now let's have a look at this here. I don't know if you can see that, but see there's two grooves that the actual little knobbing on that spring, on this spring here, goes into. Goes like that and clicks between those two notches. Now there's two problems with this safety I can see. One is that that's just, the notches are very shallow and there doesn't seem to be much spring, so I'm going to just bend that over a little bit more. There doesn't seem to be a lot of spring pushedness against those little notches, and they're not very deep. Alright, so I've actually just made those little furrows in that a little bit deeper. I made this one probably a bit further back because, you know, I just want to make sure that that little knob went right into the thing. But anyway, we'll put it back together and we'll see how it goes. Alright, so I've got it back together now, so let's have a look at this safety. It's much better. It actually does have a click now, so it's unlikely to be accidentally put back on. See, I can kind of go like that. It is sitting in that forwardmost notch quite well, so that's good. But when I put it back, if you look at the little knob on the spring in conjunction with that shiny groove that I've put, it still doesn't go all the way into that groove. So it does click, but it's not all the way. So the next thing I've got to do is, if you look at where this safety engages with this bar at the back of the trigger, is I think I'm going to just file a tiny bit off the front of the trigger so it actually goes more positively, goes further into that part there. Stops, because of course that's stopping the trigger from lifting up. And if I do that, then this should go further this way and actually go into that shiny notch there and just be a lot more positive. But yeah, it's 1000% better. You can actually, if you listen, it's 1000% better. Before there was no click, it just kind of slid between the two things without any detention whatsoever. Alright, so I just did that job, but I just took the tiniest little bit off that corner there. You can see where I've actually slipped slightly and just touched the surface on the edge, but that little tiny bit has made all the difference. Now look, so that, you know, I'm actually putting a fair bit of pressure on that now. Putting a lot of pressure. There we go. And then it took a fair bit to click it out. Like if I brush it with my finger when I'm doing the bolt, it might go to that point, but you can see, because I've got that little notch there, it actually is tending to actually that's a secondary benefit of what I've done. It's not actually catching on that corner like it was before, because before it would just go a tiny bit just there and then it would lock the trigger. But now I've got that little notch that I've cut there. It's actually tending to push the safety off. But once the safety's on, and that's the main thing as far as safety goes. When a safety's on, it has to be obviously on. It can't just be, you know, slipping off again. That's actually quite good. I'd be quite confident carrying that. Now, I've done a bit of research on this magazine. When the Winchester Magnum was introduced, which I think was in 1950, during some time, I'm not sure exactly when, probably in the late 50s, Savage actually modified their Model 4, which had been around since the 20s, basically, to 22 Magnum. So they just lengthened the action a little bit. So this was used in the model, it's called the Model 4M. And then when the 65M, this one, came out, they just used the magazine that they had, of course, which makes sense, and also the Stevens 34M. Now, another rifle that Savage introduced for a short time, I think in the 60s, was called the Model 982 MDL. I talked about the
the Mossberg Chuckster hammer-fired bolt-action rifle, and also the Magnum version of that, which is actually called the 640. There's a variety of them. There's 640K and 640KA or something, but they're 22 Magnum rifles, and they actually use this same magazine. So I don't really know. I don't know whether maybe Mossberg got in first and designed this magazine and Savage just copied it, or vice versa. But interestingly enough, if you've got one of these Mossberg 640 22 Magnum rifles, it also takes this same magazine. Now, because I've got so enthusiastic about this rifle, which kind of surprised me to be honest, I thought, I looked online about magazines and I saw there was actually a gun shop here was advertising 10-shot magazines. While I got the chance, I'll buy a 10-shot magazine. So this is a Savage, original Savage. I'm not sure where this will focus to, but there we go. Savage, caliber 22 Magnum. So what it says on here, it fits the Savage and Stevens and Lakefield 93, 305, 310, 502 and 503 series. Anyway, let's open this packet up, get this magazine out. One difference I note straight away, I mean, it's nice solid construction. Let's compare it. Yes, it has the same little lump on the front, but twice as long, because the magazine's twice as long. Main difference, this one's got a solid stainless steel, or like a pressed stainless steel follower. This has got a moulded plastic follower. But yeah, it looks like both magazines look like they can be disassembled. So yeah, let's put the big one in and see how we go. There we go, that actually went in quite well. So there we are with the 10-shot magazine. Alright, here we are at the range, and I've got my new 10-shot magazine, so I'm going to give that a bit of a go. Alright, so what I'm going to do, sorry about the light, it's late in the day, I've only just arrived at the range, it's a 4-hour drive from my house. So I'm just going to do I might just fire a couple of 5-shot groups, and then I'll do an offhand one just to check how it's working now with the safety fixed. Not a good start, is it? Now that magazine, that's not picking up the cartridges. Alright, so the initial result of that magazine is not so good. I may have to actually adjust something to get it further up. But anyway, I'll go and get the original magazine. We've gone back to the 5-shot magazine here because this 10-shot one's just not working. So I'll leave that till I get home and we'll have a look at that. Right. Alright, so I've loaded up another 5. So I just fired those 10 shots bench rest. We'll have a look at them in a sec. But I thought what I'll do now is I'll just do a reasonably rapid fire 5 shot, because as I said, last time I fired this rifle offhand in a rapid fire event, I kept sweeping the safety on. So, but now that we've got a definite click on the safety, I thought I'd give that a go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fire 5 offhand reasonably rapidly as if I was in an event. So here we go. Alright, so there we go. Now I don't know how well that went, because it's a fairly small target I'm shooting at 50 metres and I'm doing it fairly quickly. A couple of them I know I pulled, but anyway, we'll just that seemed to go alright. I didn't have any problem with the safety. So anyway, we'll go and have a look now and see how our groups went. So this is my first target of 5 shots from that magazine. Now I'm a bit confused about this one here. There's this was actually a second-hand target. I didn't think it had any shots on it, but I suspect maybe it did, because it was only a 5-shot magazine, so I think there may have already been a shot on that one, and there's one down here as well, which I don't think was one of mine either. But anyway, you can see we've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think probably this is the group here. This one here, you see there's a bit of a flyer. It could be you know, I didn't clean the barrel. There might have been a bit of oil on the barrel for that first shot, so I suspect that was the first shot. And then we had the other 4 here. Then I fired 5 shots. Now maybe we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there with that offhand group. That was at 50 metres though, and shot fairly quickly, so that's not too bad. I only just arrived here too, so I didn't have a chance to get my eye in, so that's my excuse. But these are fairly small targets. I mean, that's only 3 inches from there to there. So, you know, we've still, if we discount that I've clearly pulled that one and pulled this one a bit, but even there, that's about a kind of a 4-inch group offhand, which is not fantastic, but it's not too bad. But anyway, the actual, you know, the manipulation of the bolt, and I didn't have any problem with the safety this time. Alright, so I've just put a cartridge in both my 5-shot magazine, which is working fine, and my 10-shot, which is not working at all, and I think you can kind of see the problem there, can't you? That bolt has to be able to pick up that cartridge. Alright, so it's time to see if we can get this new magazine working. So again, here we go, get this in the frame. So basically what I want is to get this looking like that, because I know this one feeds alright. So we've got to get that up. Now if we look at this, you can see there seems to be a lot smaller space between there than there, so that cartridge is not sitting up. So we need to obviously bend that feed lip, kind of get my little tool, has to go out this way. So what I might do is I might measure that gap between at the front of the feed lips here, and then we'll endeavour to get, and I'll measure the back of the gap at the back as well, and we'll endeavour to get this one the same. Now I've got my high standard feed lip tool, so you can still buy these from High Standard, or you could make one yourself obviously. It's just a piece of, well, it's about 3/8 inch square steel bar, and you can see that it's got a little slot. It's only about the probably thickness of a hacksaw blade. You could probably cut that, and you can see it's not actually quite parallel with the tool, it's on a slight angle. And then you've got this bit is ground away. Now let's put a cartridge in there now. I think that looks better. Let's put a cartridge in the other one. Alright, what do we think of that? It's pretty similar. I think this is still not quite sticking up quite as far.
Okay, so that's still holding that cartridge quite well there. Similar to that one. And they're sticking up, where are we? Sticking up a similar height. So let's go get the rifle and try that now. Alright, so I've got 2 cartridges in here. I just brought 2 cartridges to work to do this job, so that's all I've got. But I think we'll be able to tell straight away. So, trying to do this one-handed. There we go. No, so it still didn't pick up that cartridge. Alright, so hopefully this rifle's not going to move. That's it. Alright, we ready? So the same problem. Alright, so I've tried and tried and tried to get this to feed this magazine by adjusting the feed lips and stuff, and it just won't. It'll feed, of the first 2, it'll feed the first one, but then the second one, what happens is it pops up like that, and then that makes the back down too low, because as you can see, so that makes the back go down too low for the bolt to catch it, and the bolt rides over the top. Now I think it's a design fault with the magazine, even though it's a genuine Savage magazine. If you look at that spring in there, the spring is just at the back here, and see how the spring is tending to bow, and when it bows it actually makes that go like that. It needs to be sitting like that in order to feed. See that? Now I can try to crimp these together, but then the cartridge is the same length all the way along pretty much, so as it comes out here it has to be able to come up there to go into the chamber. So you can't have this gap between these 2 front feed lips any smaller than the diameter of the cartridge, and I've pretty much got it at that diameter now. Alright, so here we are back again. You'll see I've actually put a scope on this rifle since that initial footage that you've been watching, and I've had it out to the range a few times. Now what I did first was I actually bought a few different types of ammo. I bought some Remington, some Mexican Aguila, and then I bought some Hornady varmint, 30 grain varmint ones with the red tips, red plastic tips. And I did a bit of testing, and I actually did some filming, but do you think I can find that footage? I think I may have accidentally deleted it, but it was just basically me sitting at the bench rest. The upshot was that the Hornady shot beautifully compared to the other shot okay, but the Hornady was really shot really well. So I've actually since bought a brick of that, and I'm going to concentrate on that from now on. And then I went out to the range just a couple of weekends ago, and I actually went in a field rifle competition with this, and I managed to get second. So it actually shot very well. Surprisingly, the actual ergonomics of this rifle are really quite good. The cheek piece, the balance, the length of pull, you know, the trigger's not super light, but it's kind of okay. And I was actually able to shoot it really well. I think I've already showed you the footage of actually fixing the safety. Now I actually did that this week since I did that field rifle shoot. One problem I had with the field rifle shoot was in cycling the bolt quickly, I was actually brushing the safety on, because back before, as you saw in the early part of the video, the safety was just flopping around not doing anything. I was brushing the safety off, then going to fire, and the safety was on, and I was going to push it off. I got to the stage where every time I was cycling I was just pushing it forward with my thumb to make sure that it wasn't on, and it often was. But yeah, just earlier this week I actually pulled it apart and did that footage that I showed you. So I assume if you watch this video you either have a Model 65 or 65M or one of the other clones of the same basic thing, or you're maybe seeing one that you're thinking of buying. So my take home, I guess, is the following. You know, it's a nice example of
this kind of era of rifles, this kind of 60s, 70s, kind of cheapening, you know, it's still Savage, it's still a premium brand, but kind of cheapening the manufacture and changing the styling to something that they considered more modern, while cheapening or making cheaper, maybe it's a better word than just cheapening, because cheapening suggests poor quality, making a way of manufacturing it at a lower price. Now the whole hammer-fired, non-removable bolt thing is kind of a bit weird, and I don't think it's very good personally, and you know, no one continued on with it, so I think that kind of proves that it was kind of a bit of an experimental thing at the time by these various manufacturers, and they didn't go on with it. They've probably, you know, with CNC, they're probably able to machine, you know, a bolt and a receiver and all that just as cheap now compared to back in the 60s and 70s, as they could stamp, you know, these parts in this, you know, which is why they did it in the first place. They obviously still, you know, their barrel manufacture obviously is still of a high standard, because this is really quite an accurate rifle, and looking on the forums, other people say the same about them. So yeah, the other thing I suppose is when you, let's just decock this. That's a good thing, being able to decock it with the trigger. When you want to cycle it fast, there is that initial, you got to kind of, there's an initial, you hit the block when it hits the hammer, and you have to, you know, I wouldn't call it a smooth bolt compared to, for example, I mean, I don't have another 22 Magnum, so it's difficult for me to compare, and I've never really shot any other 22 Magnums either. So, but I suspect things like a CZ 22 Magnum, you know, the 4.57, or you know, the Ruger American, I think those sort of rifles would have a much smoother pull. But saying that, if you find one of these like this that's in good condition, hasn't had a lot of use, and is a good price, and you're after a 22 Magnum just for, you know, hunting, I wouldn't say go past it, certainly. You know, I'm kind of, to be honest, when I first got it, I thought, oh, this is a bit crap, really. But since I've been shooting it, and you know, looking at the design, and yeah, and basically in shooting it, it's kind of grown on me actually. I still think it's butt ugly, but ugly in a kind of retro 60s, 70s kind of way. So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have one of these, certainly give me some feedback, you know, in the comments. Let me know what you think, how yours shoots, and everything. I'd be interested to know. And if you've got an older one that's in worse condition and it's had problems, it might be worth putting there, because other people, you know, that's looking at this video will see that, and that might give them a bit more information than I'm able to give with this kind of brand new looking one. Until next time, thanks for watching.